This fall, in Wednesday Night Kids, we studied the book of Joshua. And maybe kids can help me. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho. And the walls came tumbling down. Awesome. Well, if you turn over a few pages in your Bibles, you'll find the book of Judges. Judges is a little more of a, maybe in human terms, a dark book. It talks about consequences, obedience or the lack thereof, and what happens in consequences. So today I would like us to consider Judges chapter 2. It's not totally chronologically written, but you'll get the gist as we go through. Judges chapter 2. The angel of the Lord at Bochum. The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give to your forefathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land. But you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? Now therefore I tell you that I will not drive them out before you. They will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. When the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud, and they called the place Bochum, where they offered sacrifices to the Lord. After Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to his own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him, and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaish. After that, the whole generation had been gathered to their fathers. Another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They provoked the Lord to anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Asherahs. In his anger against Israel, the Lord handed them over to raiders who plundered them. He sold them to their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders, yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them. Unlike their fathers, they quickly turned from the way in which their fathers had walked, the way of obedience to the Lord's command. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies, as long as the judge lived, for the God had compassion on them. And then as they groaned under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt than those of their fathers, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and said, because this nation has violated the covenant that I laid down for their forefathers and has not listened to me, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left when he died. I will use them to test Israel and see whether they will keep the way of the Lord and walk in it as their forefathers did. The Lord has allowed these nations to remain. He did not drive them out at once by giving them into the hands of Joshua. And so it continues to this day. A helicopter was flying over Seattle and was engulfed in a sudden thunderstorm, followed by dense fog. Understandably, the pilot lost his position, and he slowly inched along until he saw a tall building looming out of the fog. He saw people inside, and as he slowly circled the building, he wrote a message in big letters, "Where am I?" The people inside hurried to help him and responded with a large whiteboard message that read, "In a helicopter." Immediately, he recognized the building was a Microsoft headquarters, made a loop, and safely landed. When asked how he got his bearings, he responded. After seeing the message they wrote, he knew he was at Microsoft because the answer, although technically correct, was completely useless. What kind of message did Joshua's generation give the next generation? And maybe more importantly, what kind of message are we giving the next generation? Something seems to be lost in a very short amount of time. The Battle of Jericho alone was a miraculous story that one wouldn't think would be easily forgotten. But it was. Chapter 2, verse 10. After that whole generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. To put that in perspective, Reese, Treg, come up here. Oh, no. Okay, let's say these are my two oldest grandsons, 14 and 13, right? Mm-hmm. So my dad, let's just say my dad fought in the Battle of Jericho, okay? And then I was born, and I was born a little late in his life. And then my kids came along. And by the time you guys, or young adults like you are now, you didn't know anything about the battle. That doesn't make sense, especially, Treg, with your interest in military history, right? I mean, you would have pried, if you would have even heard a hint of a military battle that my dad fought, you would have just pried the information out of me, right? But you didn't even know about it. And I don't think it's because you weren't listening, okay? I don't think that's what happened. I think maybe I didn't tell you, or maybe my dad didn't tell me. Okay, you can sit down. Thank you. These guys are really good friends. They went camping again, I think, this week, and here, not too long ago, they were out in 9-degree weather overnight. If they don't want you to find them out in the pasture, you're not gonna. Trust me. We tried. I can just hear them talking about the battle. My grandpa, great-grandpa, fought the Battle of Jericho. I mean, there was a 30-foot watchtower. The walls were 12 feet high and 6 feet thick. This was before grenade launchers and missiles and C4 and all that. But the walls came straight down so they could walk straight in. They just crumbled. To me, it seems miraculous. But it seems so bizarre that it wasn't passed down. I think you could make an argument, maybe it wasn't even true. That'd be a reason, right? That'd be a reason it wouldn't be related. Well, number one, thousands of books and articles have been written proving the biblical narrative. And no offense, but by people a lot smarter than you and me. Quite a number of them started as atheists, and these are some that I've heard of. Maybe you have too. Albert Henry Ross, Anthony Flew, Alistair McGrath, Francis Collins, John Gurdon, John Lennox, love that guy, Jordan Peterson, very, very recently, Lee Strobel. And you might ask, how smart are they? Well, when the kids were little, we read a book from C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia, as a family. And C.S. Lewis started his academic career as an atheist, but then studied himself out of it and into Christianity. After reading about Narnia, I read the Screwtape Letters. I think Ed gave me that book. And I was pretty excited. In the mail, we got a book of 4 of the works of C.S. Lewis. And because I liked the other stuff, I thought, well, this is awesome. I wasn't smart enough to read it. I mean, this guy, the intellectual greatness that these people have is just puts you in awe. And it's not just using big words. They actually know what they mean, you know? So we've listened to Lee Strobel several times. He set out to write a book disproving the Bible, because I think his wife became a Christian, and he decided, well, that's a good way, I'll figure that out. So now he lectures for Summit Ministries. Fascinating story. He couldn't do it. Two of my very favorites are Jordan Peterson and John Lennox. I listened to them in a podcast recently when Jordan interviewed John, and I had to listen to it twice before I could even think about comprehending what they said, and I'm planning on listening to it again. It fascinates me the depth of analysis that these people go to. Jordan just recently, 2022, no longer counts himself as an atheist. And he started giving a series of lectures on the book of Genesis. He collaborated with a team of notable theologians on the book of Exodus, and is currently writing a book, Those Who Wrestle with God. And he's just an amazing man. There have been many other scholars who have spent their entire careers proving the validity of the Bible. And personally, I think it comes down to a choice. There's overwhelming data to me that it's true. Obviously, it's the most read book of all time. But God's given us a will to either accept or reject. I guess because it's above my pay grade to figure out any more detail on that, I'm just going to let it go and move on. But is there other evidence, or lack of it, that would help us in covering why the story of Jericho was not passed on within just a few years? There have been 3 archaeological digs at the site of Jericho. The first was a German team, and they dug between 1907 and 1909, and they found a pile of mud bricks. The second was a little more modern digging methods. British archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon re-excavated the site in the 50s and determined that the bricks the Germans had unearthed were from the city wall that had collapsed. She also found the city was covered with 3 feet of ash, indicating a fire had completely destroyed what was left, which include burned grain that had been stored. And if you remember, they weren't supposed to take anything but the gold and silver. We turn back a few pages to Joshua. Read a few verses out of chapter 6, verse 19. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. When the trumpet sounded, the people shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the people gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So every man charged straight in, and they took the city. Down in verse 24, then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she had hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. The last excavation was pretty recent, 1997, by an Italian team. And I found this kind of fascinating. They were hired by the new Palestinian Department of Archaeology. They announced, after their excavation was abruptly suspended after 1 month, that they had found no evidence of destruction from the time of Joshua. Have you ever heard the term fake news? It appears that the excavation was to disprove evidence from earlier digs. Ironically, that very same year, later in 1997, Dr. Bryant Wood, Director of Associates for Biblical Research, examined the Italian excavation site and found part of the stone wall still intact that they had uncovered. Shows a picture of him next to this wall that goes up higher than the ceiling here. It appears, in his opinion, that it was the area of Rahab's house and the wall that was spared because she'd hidden the spies. Remember, they got out alive, so not everything, they weren't crushed in their house. And perhaps it's been the most important discovery so far. Ironic, isn't it? So I think a good case can be made that the story is true from both biblical narrative and physical evidence. So we're still left with the question, why? Why wasn't it passed down? I can only think of one thing. They didn't really think it was a miracle. Not really. The people were there, they were eyewitnesses, but over time, the story lost its majesty. Maybe they just thought they were marching around the city and shouting really loud made the walls crumble. I think it's easy to start thinking you're more significant than you are. Did God give them the victory, or did they just take the credit? Many attending here today are confessing believers. It was a miracle when you became a Christian. But over time, did you get complacent that maybe you just were doing the right thing? And so, I'm a pretty nice guy. God saved me, right? I'm a good guy. The last half of the chapter of Judges 2 deals with consequences of disobedience. I borrowed this information from Chuck Swindoll. I'd use the term stolen, but we're in church. So I'll say I borrowed it, because he actually borrowed it from an historian, so I think this is fair. The historian says that an average civilization in the world lasts 200 years, which should kind of scare the pants off you if you know how old the United States is. He says there are definite steps to what happens in civilizations. And if you're taking notes, this might be something to write down. So these are the steps of a civilization. They start out in bondage. From bondage, they go to spiritual faith. From spiritual faith to great courage. From great courage to liberty. From liberty to abundance. And this is now the decline. From abundance to leisure. From leisure to selfishness. From selfishness to complacency. From complacency to apathy. From apathy to dependence. From dependence to weakness. And then we're already all the way back from weakness to bondage. Churches are dying because not only do members of the church not believe the gospel is true, the pastors don't believe it either. A lady that's attending here told me that the pastor of her church that she'd attended previously told her that a lot of the professors at the seminary training the pastors don't believe God exists. If you don't believe God exists, your message, although technically correct, will be completely useless. Are the most important conversations in your house about great plays in football games or where you will spend eternity? Are the most important conversations in your house about golf or where you will spend eternity? Sorry, Collier and Lindsay. Sorry. Are the most important conversations in your house about farming or where you will spend eternity? And it doesn't have to be football or golf or farming. Trust me, I have a proclivity to do anything fun. I've spent hours shooting, hunting, roping, playing with motorcycles, and there's more. Maybe, Roger, you'll remember Wozniak's, where your house was. You remember, Ted, where you built your house? Ted told me one time he didn't know anything about sports, games, free throws, touchdowns, stuff like that. But bingo. He loved bingo. Every Saturday night they went to bingo. What are you preoccupied with? It's a challenge. It's a challenge to me. I'm not trying to be up here on my soapbox. Have you even told your kids about your miracle stories? Might be health related. Might be just your story of salvation. I love Raleigh Hutton when he ends a letter every time he says, remember, eternity is at stake. Does anyone here need to make a personal commitment to Jesus? Do you need maybe just to put your membership here? Is that something you're interested in joining the body in a more meaningful way? Don't put it off. Eternity is at stake. Will you stand and join me in a closing prayer? Lord, I thank you for the opportunity to come in this body and worship together, encourage each other, lift each other up. Thank you. Thank you for your redemption. Thank you for your gift on the cross. I just pray as we leave that you would bless our week. Let us see opportunities to share the narrative, share our story, encourage those around us. I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. The other guys will be up here. Remember, every one of the elders started as an unbeliever.